Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. President Zelensky and President Erdogan discussed the revival of peace negotiations during bilateral talks in Ankara. US President Donald Trump signs a bill that orders the release of the Epstein files. And Turkey will host next year's UN Climate Summit, while Australia will lead the conference's negotiations among governments. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have voiced support for reviving the Istanbul peace process on Wednesday. They also emphasised the need for a just and lasting settlement to end the war following high-level talks in Ankara.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky met on Wednesday in the Turkish capital Ankara. Erdogan welcomed Zelensky, who is paying a working visit to Turkey at the presidential complex. Following their private meeting and a working dinner, Presidents Erdogan and Zelensky addressed the media in a joint press conference. Speaking at a joint news conference with his Ukrainian counterpart, Erdogan said Ankara believes it would be beneficial to implement the Istanbul process within a comprehensive framework capable of addressing the now acute challenges of the conflict.
We believe it would be beneficial to reactivate the Istanbul process with a more comprehensive approach that addresses the problems that have become acute. We expect all our partners who desire to halt the bloodshed in the region to adopt a constructive approach regarding the Istanbul process.
Zelensky thanked Turkey for what he called its principled stance on Russia's war, saying Ankara's support for Ukraine's independence and sovereignty is very important for Kyiv. Ukrainian president also stressed that the war must end.
We talked substantively about the situation in diplomacy. And now many processes have become more active, and we are trying to ensure that all activity is aimed specifically at peace, a just peace and guaranteed security. The war must end. There is no alternative to peace. Russia must understand that there can be no reward for waging war and committing killings.
Zelensky added the two leaders discussed defence industry cooperation and that teams on both sides agreed to strengthen joint production projects.
Ukraine has been hit by one of the largest Russian aerial attacks in months, striking multiple regions and causing heavy casualties, while US and Russian officials have quietly drafted a new plan to end the war in Ukraine. But it would require Kyiv to surrender territory and severely limit the size of its military. Here's more on that story.
At least 26 people have been killed in a major Russian missile and drone attack on the western Ukrainian city of Ternopil, according to officials. The upper floors of a residential building were torn away, and debris and personal belongings were scattered across the area as thick smoke rose over the city. More than 90 people were wounded.
As you can hear, the equipment ceased its operation. A moment of silence has been declared to be able to hear possible survivors under the rubble. Around 30 minutes ago, we made contact with a young person in their 20s. The rescuers keep constant contact with him.
The military says X-101 cruise missiles hit the residential block in Ternopil, which is a city close to the Polish border that has rarely been targeted.
My son is still in the apartment on the 9th floor. I talked to him before the explosions. That's it. He said, "Mom, everything will be fine. Don't worry." After this, I tried calling and couldn't reach him. I know nothing.
Ukraine says Russia fired 476 drones and 48 missiles overnight, hitting energy and transport sites and forcing emergency power cuts during freezing temperatures. Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk regions were also struck, while drone attacks in Kharkiv injured more than 30 people, setting buildings and cars on fire. Ukraine's Air Force reports shooting down 442 drones and 41 missiles, including 10 intercepted by F-16 and Mirage 2000 jets provided by Western allies. Russia's defense ministry says it carried out a massive strike using long-range precision weapons, claiming it targeted Ukraine's military industry and energy sector. It says it's in response to Ukrainian attacks on civilian sites inside Russia. The attacks come as President Volodymyr Zelensky travelled to Turkey for talks aimed at reviving peace negotiations. He urged Kiev's allies to increase pressure on Moscow and provide more air defence missiles. A high-level US military delegation, led by Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, arrived in Ukraine to discuss efforts to end the war. The team is expected to meet Zelensky in Kiev after his return from Turkey. Ukrainian officials said the delegation was briefed on Russia's troop build-up, ongoing offensives and recent attacks on civilian areas.
Washington is working on new proposals to help end the war between Russia and Ukraine. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio wrote on X that the plan is being shaped using input from both Moscow and Kyiv. Ending such a complex and deadly conflict will require what he called serious and realistic ideas. Rubio added that a lasting peace is only possible if both sides agree to difficult but necessary concessions. He said the United States is developing a list of potential steps aimed at moving the parties closer to a settlement and will continue consulting with both governments to refine those options. Speaking of Russia-Ukraine peace efforts, the EU's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas says any plan to end the war must have the backing of both Ukrainians and Europeans. Ahead of an EU foreign ministers meeting in Brussels, she stressed that Europe continues to support a lasting and just peace.
What we as Europeans have always supported is a long, lasting and just peace, and we welcome any efforts to achieve that. Of course, for any plan to work, it needs Ukrainians and Europeans on board. So this is very clear.
Thursday marks 80 years since the opening of the Nuremberg trials, the landmark proceedings that first held Nazi leaders personally accountable for crimes committed during the Second World War. The tribunal would go on to define the principles of modern international justice and shape the courts we know today. Here's a look back at the moment that changed global law.
Nearly 80 years ago, on the 20th of November in 1945, the world witnessed a moment that reshaped international justice. In a Germany still in ruins after the Second World War, judges from the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union gathered in the city of Nuremberg. They opened the first ever international military tribunal, a court created to put the surviving leaders of Nazi Germany on trial. For the first time in history, top political, military and administrative officials were held personally accountable for crimes committed by a state. 22 of the most senior Nazi figures were brought before the tribunal, charged with crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy. 12 would eventually be sentenced to death. 3 were acquitted, the rest received long prison terms. Hermann Göring, once one of Hitler's most powerful deputies, was convicted but died by suicide just hours before his execution in October 1946. The Nuremberg process continued beyond the first tribunal. Between 1946 and 1949, the United States held 12 additional trials, prosecuting 177 Nazi officials, from SS commanders and generals to doctors and industrialists. In total, 199 people were tried in Nuremberg, 161 were convicted and 37 were sentenced to death. Nuremberg became the blueprint for modern international justice, the ancestor of today's tribunals and the International Criminal Court. And although some of the major perpetrators never stood trial, the proceedings mark the first time the world said, collectively, that such crimes would not go unanswered.
President Donald Trump has signed the bill that directs the Department of Justice to publicly release all its Jeffrey Epstein-related files. The move is expected to shed more light on the late sex offender's activities and connections to prominent figures.
All files related to a long-running investigation into late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein are set to be released. US President Donald Trump signed legislation on Wednesday ordering the Department of Justice to release the documents. In a post on his Truth Social platform, Trump framed the move as a transparency measure and used the moment to criticize Democrats over their alleged past connections to Epstein. The scandal has been a thorn in Trump's side for months as he previously resisted calls for full disclosure. But he shifted his position after mounting pressure from Epstein's victims and from within the Republican Party. He's always denied any wrongdoing. However, the material could shed more light on the activities of Epstein. Before his 2008 conviction on charges of soliciting a minor for prostitution, he died in jail in 2019 while facing federal sex trafficking charges. Attorney General Pam Bondi said the Justice Department will protect victims' privacy, so some details may be withheld, such as sensitive information for ongoing investigations. The bill, known as the Epstein Files Transparency Act, passed the House with a 427-1 vote and cleared the Senate by unanimous consent on Tuesday. The documents must be made public in a searchable format within 30 days.
Tensions in Gaza are rising again as fresh Israeli airstrikes and conflicting accounts from both sides cast new doubt on the stability of the month-old ceasefire. 10 people, including a woman and a young girl, were killed in Gaza, that's according to rescuers. The Israeli military said it had struck Hamas terrorist targets after it said gunmen had opened fire towards an area where its soldiers were operating in the southern city of Khan Yunis.
4 Israeli airstrikes across Gaza on Wednesday killed at least 25 people, according to local health authorities. It marked one of the most serious escalations since last month's US-brokered ceasefire. The heaviest casualties were reported in Gaza City's Zaytun neighborhood, where a religious endowments ministry building was hit, which killed 10 people. Additional strikes hit Shijaya, Khan Yunis and the Mawasi area. Israeli military said it targeted Hamas positions after gunmen opened fire on its troops in Khan Yunis, killing 3 of its soldiers, calling the incident a breach of the ceasefire. Hamas dismissed Israelis' account and described the strikes as a dangerous escalation, urging Washington to pressure Tel Aviv to halt its attacks. Wednesday's violence follows 2 earlier flare-ups in October, though the ceasefire remains officially in place. The latest incident comes shortly after the United Nations Security Council endorsed US President Donald Trump's plan for the Strip's political transition and reconstruction. Gaza's health ministry says 280 people have been killed during this ceasefire.
An Israeli strike on Wednesday rocked Tyre Filsai in southern Lebanon, killing at least 1 person and prompting residents to flee several villages after warnings of further attacks. The Israeli military said it targeted Hezbollah militants, while attacks on Deir Kifa, Chehur, Ainata and Tyre Filsai sent plumes of smoke into the air. On Tuesday, an Israeli strike in the Ain al-Hilweh Palestinian refugee camp near Sidon killed 13 people. Australia and Turkey have reached a compromise over who will host and lead next year's major UN climate summit. Turkey will stage COP31, but Australia will take charge of the negotiations. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese confirmed the arrangement.
Turkey is set to host next year's UN climate summit, while Australia will lead negotiations under a compromise reached during talks in Brazil. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese confirmed the deal before leaving for the G20 summit in Perth.
Beautiful Perth day. So we consulted our Pacific neighbours. I spoke with Prime Minister Marape, I spoke with Prime Minister Rambuka of Fiji, and what we did, we've come up with an outstanding result. COP31 will be hosted by Turkey. Turkey will have the COP presidency, but Chris Bowen in Australia will have the COP presidency for negotiations.
As part of the arrangement, a pre-COP meeting will be held in the Pacific, with the location still to be decided. Australia has framed its role as a Pacific COP, calling attention to the climate threats facing low-lying island states. Albanese said the deal supports regional priorities and ensures the summit does not shift to Bonn, Germany.
We're in a position where it either went to Bonn in Germany or went to Turkey. Our priority was to support the multilateral system, but also to get a good result for Australia and the Pacific.
The agreement ends a 2-year standoff after both Turkey and Australia submitted rival bids in 2022 and declined to step aside.
As the climate summit in Belém nears its end, Brazil is pushing for progress on the most divisive issues. Negotiators met President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on Wednesday to bridge gaps in climate goals and advance implementation.
Brazil is pushing to wrap up the COP30 summit on time as the meeting enters its final stretch on Friday, a departure from recent climate talks that dragged past deadline. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva met negotiators on Wednesday in a bid to secure early agreements on the thorniest issues, including fossil fuels and climate finance. Brazil is promoting its Tropical Forests Forever facility, a multilateral fund aimed at raising $25 billion in public and philanthropic money to attract another $100 billion in private investment for protecting endangered forests. The president has expressed confidence in the outcome of the talks.
I leave to Brasilia certain that my negotiators will achieve the best result that a COP can ever offer to planet Earth.
Brazilian officials say Germany plans to contribute €1 billion to the fund. Another major point of contention is a fossil fuel roadmap designed to outline how countries will accelerate the shift away from oil, gas and coal.
And so this idea of a roadmap is something that actually has been discussed for ever since. But I think, finally now have a political moment where it's been raised to that level of consciousness where everybody realizes that it's something that really has to be in this text. Again, it's one of those things. Will it land? We're going to have to fight tooth and nail. There are many parties who have already said that they do not want that in the text at all.
Nearly 200 countries are attending the 2-week UN summit in Belém, though the United States, the world's top historic emitter, is absent. Brazil hoped to approve a package of agreements on Wednesday and finalise remaining issues on Friday, but delays have already hit the release of new negotiating texts.
Now we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll discuss how Washington is deepening ties with Saudi Arabia on one hand, while facing renewed pressure for transparency and accountability at home through the release of the Epstein files. Stay with us.
It's often said the world never sleeps, but who's ready to wake you up with all you need to know about what is happening across the globe and in the region?
We are. Daybreak is live every morning, bringing you a complete wrap-up of the stories from overnight and all the news already happening in the world.
The biggest global headlines, the key regional developments, the must-read stories shaping the day.
We show them, we discuss them, we guide you through their meaning. We give you the news and a first look at the key headlines.
I'm Nadia Jani.
And I'm Lou Brown.
Join us, it's Daybreak here at A News.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. and find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back to A News. In Washington, President Donald Trump has hosted Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at the White House in a meeting that underscored deepening defence and investment ties between the United States and Saudi Arabia. The talks produced a series of key takeaways, including closer military cooperation and major pledged investments. At the same time, the US Senate has approved legislation requiring the release of Justice Department files related to the late financier Jeffrey Epstein, in a rare moment of bipartisan agreement on transparency and accountability. The bill, which follows an almost unanimous vote in the House, would compel officials to publish unclassified records with limited scope for modification. Joining me now to discuss is Gustavo de Aristegui, former diplomat from Rabat, Morocco. Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Now, when you look at the main takeaways from this White House meeting, what stands out to you the most about the direction of US-Saudi relations under President Trump?
Well, I believe that the Saudi-US relations have been more frozen than they were inexistent. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been, for decades, one of the United States' main allies, not only in the Middle East, but in the world. Let us not forget that when only Israel had the most advanced versions of the F-15 fighter jet, the only other country that had F-15s and still has F-15 jets is precisely Saudi Arabia. So right now, when I was reading the latest news over the fabulous reception that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has gotten in Washington, and everybody was saying that the United States is stepping up the military cooperation with Saudi Arabia. In fact, it's going back to what it was. You see, when they're sharing the F-35 jet, it is a jet that is shared with many, many other countries. Many NATO nations have it. Some have even ordered it recently, the Germans, for example. And many non-European countries also have access to the F-35 jet. But let me tell you that the only time that the exclusivity of the equivalent of today's F-22 was banned for any country in the world except Israel, it was the Saudis that had access to that. Second thought about this. The Saudi kingdom is an essential player in the Middle East, and even, I would say, in the Muslim world, not only the Arab world. Let's not forget that it is, of course, they are the custodians of the holy places. The stability of the Saudi kingdom is essential to all the Muslim world, to all the Arab world, to the Middle East, and by extension to the globe. Saudi Arabia has been the most important, or one of the three most important players in Middle East stability in the last decade. Of course, the terrible incident with journalist Khashoggi cast a shadow and some clouds over the prestige and good name of the kingdom. Well, there's many people that have turned the page. It looks like the directly responsible people for that crime have been severely punished in the kingdom. And as President Trump very practically said yesterday, the day before yesterday, sorry, in the state dinner, well, you know, it seems like the Crown Prince says that he had nothing to do with it and he knew nothing about it. And why should we question his word?
Yeah, okay. Now, let's stay on defence for a moment, but I certainly do want to come back to the incident with the late Jamal Khashoggi. One of the major points was the push to elevate defence ties, including designating Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally and signalling closer military cooperation. What does that status actually mean in practical terms?
Well, it is not the first Arab country that has this status. Let us not forget that. This status is, it's called strategic ally of the United States, and Australia has it. Japan has it. And in the Middle East, the first Arab country to have this status was Jordan. So, in fact, it is not a novelty in the geopolitical scene, but it does imply very important consequences. It implies that there is a deepening of intelligence gathering and intelligence sharing. And let us not forget that the Saudi intelligence service is right now one of the most well-funded and well-trained in the region. And definitely I would put into that very distinguished group the Jordanian General Intelligence Directorate, really one of the very best in the world, not only in the region. So it is a very important qualification. It gives you access to very advanced weapon systems. It gives you access to a very delicate intelligence sharing. It gives you access to joint development of certain technologies. And it doesn't actually apply like Article 5 of NATO, but it's the closest thing that comes to that. And then there's another country that has recently been designated as strategic ally of the United States, which is the state of Qatar. And let's not forget that the state of Qatar has the largest Air Force base in the world outside of the United States, and perhaps Ramstein in Germany. It's bigger than Aviano in Italy. And it's going to become the training center, the main training center, not only for F-35s in the region, but even for F-22s, for American pilots are the only ones in the world that have the F-22, and also for advanced training of the improvements of the F-15, which includes, of course, Saudi Arabian pilots, which are the only ones, as I said before, that have the F-15 outside of the United States. And then, of course, just imagine that the Abraham Accords see the light. And then the Israelis would have full diplomatic ties and excellent ties with the Saudis, in which case even the Israeli pilots would probably benefit from that facility if Qatar also joins the Abraham Accords, which I think that in not too distant future will happen.
Will happen. Okay, let's go back to what you touched on earlier. Now, human rights concerns, including the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, appear to be played down again, with President Trump publicly defending Mohammed bin Salman and contradicting earlier US intelligence assessments. How does that sit with America's claim to champion human rights?
Well, you know, there is a great deal of controversy over the need of governments in the world to resort to realpolitik or go back to realpolitik, the classic doctrine of Professor Morgenthau and his school. Let me tell you that, in fact, governments don't have permanent friends and don't have permanent enemies. They have permanent interests. And this is a Churchill phrase. And permanent interests are the ones that must prevail. I'm not saying that we have to forget human rights. Of course, human rights has to be the main guiding light for any democratic government around the world. But again, things seem better in Saudi Arabia today than they were 10 years ago. The situation of public freedoms in Saudi Arabia seems better today than it was 10 years ago. People that have different faiths are freer to practice that faith in Saudi Arabia. It wasn't the case 10 years ago. And for example, the Shia minority in Saudi Arabia is today more integrated than it was 10 years ago. So yes, there was a very ugly incident that was a horrendous crime. There's no doubt about it. Killing and torturing and killing, and then cutting into pieces the remains of the tortured person is an unspeakable, heinous crime. But if the judicial system of the country has concluded that the responsible criminals of that heinous crime were caught, tried, sentenced, and punished, then we should actually forget our reticences and our doubts and respect the legal system of the kingdom. And again, which provides us the perfect panel or the perfect bridge to go back to what we were saying before. Saudi Arabia is a country that we cannot afford to see isolated. Saudi Arabia is a country that has a crucial role in containment of the expansionism of the Iranian regime. It is a crucial country in having normalized and good economic, defense, and strategic relations with Pakistan, which is an essential country in Asia, and it is a country that, because of its status as custodian of the holy sites of Islam, has a privileged character of interlocutor, of main interlocutor, I would even dare say, with the rest of the Islamic world. So, and then of course, let's not forget that Saudi Arabia is probably the most strategically placed country. I mean, look at it. It has the direct borders with some of the most delicate parts of the Middle East. Then it is on the Gulf the Gulf of Aden, and it also controls the entry to the Red Sea, which is partly also a coast of the Saudis, and it also shares the Gulf of Aqaba with Israel and Jordan. So I mean, it would be difficult to think of another country that has such a strategic position in the world.
Okay. Ambassador, let's turn to Congress now for our second area of discussion. How significant is it that both the House and Senate have backed the release of the Epstein files by overwhelming margins in what's being described as a rare moment of bipartisan unity?
Well, I think that this is a very clear sign that the Trump administration is not afraid of whatever result or whatever information is contained in those files. Epstein was a disgusting individual and a sex offender by all standards and measurements. I of something more disgusting than abusing women and abusing underage women even more so. So he was tried and sentenced by independent courts of justice in the United States of America. Then he committed suicide, probably because he was completely overwhelmed by guilt, disgust, and shame. The thing is that maybe these files, once disclosed, it's Pandora's box. Nobody knows what they're going to find in them, and people are thinking that this can be the scandal that ends the Trump presidency, and it might be the scandal that puts other people very much into the boiler of public eye. So I think we have to be patient and wait and to see what actually is contained in these files. In any case, I'm really worried and a bit revolted, if you don't mind me using such a strong word, by the polarization of the political scene in the whole world, and how people are using as much dirt as they can to go at the throats of each other. And I'm not just signaling one party here, I'm signaling both. This is not the way to conduct politics. That is the dirtiest way to behave in politics, and that is not the stature of statesmen.
Okay, now there's been concern from some lawmakers about privacy and the potential for harm to people who aren't accused of any crime. How does the bill balance transparency with protections for victims and innocent third parties?
Well, let's begin with the main target in the Epstein file disclosure by the opposition party in the United States, which is the Democratic Party. The main objective, the main goal, is to destroy President Trump, and President Trump has not been mentioned in a single trial, either to Epstein or any of his accomplices that are presently in jail, as somebody that was part of the orgies, or that was part of the crimes that were committed by one and the other. So the problem is that once you open Pandora's box, trying to accuse the President of the United States, you might find yourself disclosing what other people that have not been mentioned in the trials or have not been mentioned in the judicial investigations of the Department of Justice carried out by the U.S. attorneys, and they could very seriously be hurt. And I'm talking about reputation and image. And we know that in the 21st century, there is nothing as fragile as reputation. It is extremely complicated to build it and very easy to destroy it.
And realistically, Ambassador, what might the public learn from these files that it doesn't already know? And are there still likely to be limits on what is released in the name of national security or ongoing investigations?
Well, you have 2 points that are very, very pertinent. One is that I think that everything is already known. I mean, the disclosure phase in the trials in the courts of justice was very thorough. It would be shocking to me if we found out something different to what has already been known through the judicial disclosure in court, or through the investigations by journalists in different medias. But then, of course, there is the second part. I mean, most of it is completely unusable in the Court of Justice because there is a statute of limitations, and therefore you cannot prosecute somebody legally if the legal cause has expired. You are just going to hurt the reputation of that person, be it true or be it false. And what is even worse, if there are many victims that don't want to see their names disclosed. Many victims wanted to step forward and say, yes, I have been a victim of this dreadful, disgusting sex criminal, but others are in the process of rebuilding their lives. And if their names are disclosed, it's going to ruin their lives, the lives of their friends, their families, and just imagine what their children are going to go through in their schools or their friends. It's completely ridiculous, and it is extremely irresponsible. And it just proves that sometimes the will to harm people in politics, the authors of these strategies, the designers of these strategies, don't think beyond the consequences that are far, far reaching into the general public and to innocent people that have decided not to come forward. And that is completely unacceptable by any standard.
Okay, and lastly, Ambassador, if we put these two stories side by side, so the reception of MBS and the Epstein files, a very friendly meeting with the Crown Prince and major transparency push on Epstein, what do they tell us about the state of power and accountability in Washington as we speak? And are they in tension or can they coexist?
Well, one of the things that people don't realize, even in the United States, when they start crying wolf all the time, that the United States is becoming a dictatorship, an authoritarian regime, is how exaggerated, how false the claims are. We may not be in full agreement with many of the policies of President Trump. Me as a European, I don't agree with his disengagement with NATO. I don't agree with the tariffs that have been imposed on many products in Europe, because I think that tariffs are the worst enemy of free trade, and that free trade is the basis, the main pillar of freedom and prosperity in the world. And in this sense, I am a full Reaganite. I admire President Reagan's stance for free trade. But then again, let us not forget that the United States has a very solid democracy and a very solid institutions, and that they're working. Some of the tariffs of President Trump are being questioned not even by federal circuit judges. They're even being questioned by conservative justices of the Supreme Court of the United States. So the Supreme Court of the United States, even if some of those justices were proposed by President Trump as their candidates, are being or showing their full independence as the highest legal and constitutional instance of the United States of America. So no, the institutions in the United States work, and the extremes cannot question the system any longer, because if they continue to do that, they are going to contaminate the general public, and the general public is going to start doubting their own institutions. And that is the first step towards authoritarianism. That is the first step towards the widespread of populism. This is what happens everywhere, even in consolidated democracies. Look at what happened to Venezuela. That's exactly that.
Ambassador, thank you so much. We're running a little bit short of time. As always, we appreciate you joining the program and thanks for your insight.
It is a great pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
We'll take a break now. When we return, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay tuned.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. DA Afghanistan Bank is pushing ahead with efforts to modernise the country's financial system. And this week, senior officials have been in Turkey seeking technical support. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
On an official visit to Turkey, the first deputy governor of the Afghanistan Bank, Siddiqullah Khalid, has held high-level talks with the Participation Banks Association of Turkey, known as TKBB. The delegation met with the association's chairman, Ismail Yoral, and other senior members. TKBB is considered a leader in digital banking, credited with supporting the creation of digital banks across Turkey and helping raise online banking usage to some of the highest levels in the region. During the meeting, Mr. Khalid highlighted Afghanistan's shift to a fully Islamic banking system. He said interest-based banking has been halted nationwide, and all commercial banks now operate under Islamic financial contracts. He also emphasized Afghanistan's push toward digital payments, describing it as a crucial step in modernizing the country's financial infrastructure. Kabul is now seeking Turkey's support in building electronic payment systems, strengthening technical capacity, and training Afghan banking staff. Both sides agreed that TKBB will send a technical team to Afghanistan to assess the current state of electronic payments and help evaluate the central bank's newly drafted master plan. They also reached an agreement to establish training programs inside Afghanistan aimed at helping staff adopt more quickly to digital systems. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
The second day of the 9th International Banking Forum continued in Baku with a focus on fast-moving tech in finance. The agenda covered digital finance, cybersecurity, capital markets, and the wider push toward digital-first services. The discussions brought together officials, financial institutions, fintech teams, and international companies. Sessions highlighted how cashless systems and new payment tools are changing how banks operate. Artificial intelligence and open banking drew strong attention as experts weighed both their promise and the risks. As Caspian Sea, the world's largest inland body of water, is passing through the unprecedented environmental crisis of shrinking, its southern 650-kilometre coastline in Iran is not an exception to the adverse economic and ecological impacts of the decline in water levels. Turaj Shiraliliu reports.
This is Caspian Sea from Iran's northern Bandar Anzali port city in Gilan province. the country's historical hub of shipping and transit with Central Asia, Caucasus and Europe, as well as fishery and agricultural activities. Together with Gilan, two Iranian provinces of Mazandaran and Golestan build the 650-kilometer coastline to the south of the sea out of its total 7,000-kilometer coastline. Similar to other littoral states of the Caspian Basin, Iran is experiencing the degrading environmental consequences of severe decline in the world's largest inland body of water. The Caspian Sea reached lowest recorded level at 29.2 meters below sea level in 2024, marking a dramatic 2.3-meter decline since 1996 and representing the most severe water crisis in the sea's documented history. Experts refer to reduced inflows from feeder Volga River, accelerated evaporation, and climate change as factors behind the alarming trend in dramatic decline in water levels. The Caspian Sea countries, including Iran, are facing its existential implications in biodiversity and regional economies, negatively affecting livelihood of millions of people living along its coastline. According to a report by the Stimson Center, a combination of climate and human interventions are the drivers of declining water levels. It cites the rise in temperature, decline in rainfall, increased evaporation, reduced river discharges, together with extensive dam building and river control measures, particularly on the Volga River, severely limiting freshwater deliveries as the factors behind the shrinkage. In the meantime, efforts to address the Caspian catastrophe have remained inconclusive due to geopolitical considerations and competing national interests among the littoral states. The Convention for the Protection of the Marine Environment of the Caspian Sea, signed in 2003 in Tehran and effective since 2006, provides a framework for environmental cooperation, but its implication has not been enough and complete. Restoration of the Caspian Sea ecosystem is not a luxury, but a necessity requiring a strategy built on collective will of its neighboring countries. Turaj Shiralilu, Bandar Anzali, Gilan Province, for A News.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is visiting Astana for a two-day official visit at the invitation of Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. The leaders are set to hold talks on deepening political and economic cooperation, building on a migration agreement that allows citizens of both countries to stay visa-free for up to 90 days. The visit also gives Armenia a chance to strengthen resource supplies and explore new transport routes through the region. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll discuss what Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's state visit to Kazakhstan tells us about Armenia's direction. Stay with us.
And welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Welcome back to A News. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is paying a state visit to Kazakhstan, where he's holding talks on the current state of bilateral relations and possible areas for expanded cooperation. The trip comes as Armenia continues to recalibrate its foreign policy and explore new partnerships beyond its traditional reliance on Russia. Joining me now to unpack is Ulviya Zulfikar. She's a political analyst from Baku, Azerbaijan. Ulviya, welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me to join the studio.
Now, what does this state visit to Kazakhstan tell us about how seriously Armenia now takes its relationship with Central Asian countries and Kazakhstan in particular?
Nikol Pashinyan's visit to Kazakhstan is not an ordinary diplomatic protocol. It reflects a deeper geopolitical shift, both in Armenia's foreign policy and in the wider Eurasian balance. This trip says a lot about how Armenia is accepting the new regional reality that configured after Azerbaijan restored its full sovereignty. First, we must place this visit in historical context. For more than 30 years, Armenia positions itself as a country fully aligned with Russia. It avoided regional cooperation formats, especially those to the Turkic world. During these decades, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and the Central Republics and Kazakhstan in particular built a strong network energy corridors, transport routes, Caspian cooperations, and eventually the organization of Turkic states. Armenia, due to its then conflict-centered foreign policy and closed borders, was completely outside this process. So Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's visit to Kazakhstan has drawn attention across the region, especially at a time when geopolitical alignments in the South Caucasus and Central Asia is being reshaped. This visit carries both symbolic and practical significance, revealing Armenia's attempt to reposition itself, as you said, and offering potential implications for the peace process. So what it comes to discussions, I think discussions in Kazakhstan might include Armenia's willingness to join East-West corridors, such as the Middle Corridor and broader Eurasian transport integration. If Armenia shows real interest in these projects, this would naturally complement the peace process too. Pashinyan's visit to Kazakhstan is a reflection of a deeper shift in Armenia's strategic orientation. This development acknowledges the new regional order, strengthens the logic of connectivity and cooperation, opens additional diplomatic channels that can contribute to stability, and may indirectly support the peace negotiations. In the broader picture, this visit may contribute to a more predictable and cooperative future.
Okay, Ulvia, and how does Kazakhstan benefit from deepening ties with Armenia at this point? Is it about expanding its role as a regional hub or strengthening its profile as a bridge between parts of Eurasia?
Now, first, I'd like to express that Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan share deeply rooted historical, cultural, and strategic bonds. This cooperation spans energy, transport, diplomacy, and military interactions. This country has always supported Azerbaijan's territorial integrity and maintained a balanced regional position. In this context, Kazakhstan's outreach to Armenia is a sign that regional states acknowledge the new post-conflict reality created after Azerbaijan restored its sovereignty. So if Armenia engages constructively with Central Asian countries, it of course may create more favorable psychological conditions for a long-term peace agreement. I'd like to touch upon Armenia and Russia relations in this context also, if you allow me. Sure. In recent years, Armenia has begun distancing itself from Russia. This has driven Armenia toward the European Union, France, and now more cautiously the Central Asian states. So Pashinyan is trying to distribute among the West old powers which controlled it over decades and trying to make a clear shift from its former one-vector policy. This visit can somehow challenge Russia also, demonstrating Armenia's own will to cooperate independently with the country, which is the member of Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS, and which is the central point of Central Asia with its huge territory and political potential.
And Ulvia, how does this outreach to Kazakhstan fit into Armenia's broader attempt to rethink its place in the region after recent setbacks and tensions in the South Caucasus?
As we all know, there is a reshaping situation both in South Caucasus, in Central Asia, in the region itself, and we see it both in Russian-Ukrainian war, we see it in Middle East, we see it everywhere, and Armenia, after a long closed border situation, as I said before, now reshaping, repositioning itself, and it has to do it because otherwise it has to return to its 30 years positions as it was in occupation period. So I think that Armenian Prime Minister understands that there is no other way to develop, to go further, if to keep this condition, the status quo. So keeping relations good with not only border Turkic countries such as Azerbaijan and Turkey, and going deeper to Central Asia and other countries, it might benefit Armenia in a positive way.
Okay, Ulvia, we're running short of time. Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your insight and contribution.
Thank you for having me on your show.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.